This is the Fearless Pricing Podcast, where we meet and talk real-life pricing experience. I'm your host, Filip Fucic. Pricing is hard. This is a podcast for fearless professionals and those who would like to feel that way. It's an unfortunate truth that most service pricing is created using either guesswork or copying other people's guesswork. Hello, and welcome back to the Fearless Pricing Podcast. Today on the What I Should Have Charged, we have Rupert Evill. Rupert is the founder of Ethics Insight, providing risk assessment, implementation advice, and investigative support, mostly to big companies. He has operated in over 50 countries in his 22-year career, spanning investigations, ethics, compliance, intelligence gathering, due diligence, and crisis response. Rupert completed postgraduate studies in behavioral analysis and investigative interviewing, and he's a certified fraud examiner and published author of Bootstraping Ethics, Integrity Risk Management for the Real-World Application. Rupert, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we're all at the edge of our seat here. Tell us the story.
Okay. Well, yeah, you said big companies. Sometimes it's also organizations. I work with a lot of the third sector as well. And this was one of the examples. So it's government linked. And I just started Ethics Insight. So 2019, having sort of left from salaried employment. So there's a significant fear factor about where money is going to come from. And I got a call literally sort of 2 days after founding the company from someone who'd been referred to me by a previous colleague. And they were working, as I said, in the governmental role. And they had a backlog of 50 plus allegations and complaints and stuff that had come through their whistleblower line, covering basically half the globe. And these are big, scary projects like infrastructure, major sort of public works. And if you think about development financing in developing countries, so everything from bridges to roads to basic infrastructure, they said, would you be interested in basically helping us triage down that data set of 50 by sort of doing the initial threat assessment and then drafting the investment plan? And I said, yes, in theory, what would it look like? And then they sent across a couple of samples of sort of the initial data that comes in with the report. And I thought, okay, it's like most allegations that come in, they come in fairly unformed and quite limited. So I made the first mistake, which I should have known better because I deal in the world of facts and not assumptions. What they sent was a fair representation of the sample. And then they said that because we're a governmental organization, it's a per unit price for each one of these tasks. And that was $500. And so it was meant to be something you could turn around in a few hours and just do your initial, in a template, your initial sort of threat assessment of the triage, your initial sort of credibility, verifiability, and materiality assessment of the allegation with a basic investigations plan. This is what you should go and look for. I didn't factor multiple things. Firstly, there was some of the initial disclosures were epic. So one in particular, I don't want to do conspirational aspersions, but it came from a German whistleblower who probably basically sent a book to substantiate the allegations. And that took 3 days just to read through the materials. The scope in terms of the disclosure was wildly different from the initial one. The other area that was very underestimated that I should have known better again was the bureaucracy factor. So everything had to go into certain templates, use certain systems. You had to tick certain boxes, even if it was totally redundant. So they checked this database for watch lists, even if it was irrelevant to the person. But you still had to go through every single step. And obviously the contracting process, the invoicing, all of that back-end stuff was similarly what you'd expect from a large sort of government-linked entity. As the project progressed, because I was embedded on their email systems, etc., so I then had to start to do the stuff that contract employees sometimes have to do, like sit through an hour of cybersecurity training, because otherwise your email will be revoked, all that kind of stuff. I did go back and I did negotiate exceptions on project, but I was starting from such a weak base that it was never representative on value. And the final thing I should have known is I was sat in Singapore. And this is something I know you talked about a lot before. And people I was dealing with were sat in a country that's developing where the cost of living is very low, like in a fraction of Singapore. And the people I was working with had also come from sort of middle income or developing countries for the most part. So there was a mismatch in an understanding of the basic cost of living differentials in terms of what they thought was a fair price might actually have been a fair price for somebody living in that environment, but sure as hell wasn't for someone living in Singapore. So it was a sort of a rude awakening, a recognition that it's uncomfortable, but you have to price where you're based, not where the client is. That's the summary of it. And it lasted 6 months, which meant that there was obviously considerable opportunity cost because I was working in the business, not on the business in those first 6 months. So I wasn't sort of necessarily setting up a lot of the infrastructure, which meant I was outsourcing some tasks that maybe I would have been better doing myself on my own business. So it was that tension that you constantly have when you're running your business about what you do and don't take on, such that you can balance those sort of working in the business, on the business tensions.
Right. So you ended up severely underwhelmed by what you got paid.
Yeah, I mean, the work was interesting and I'm grateful for the opportunity. And there were some of those cases that were quick to turn around. But if you were to draw some sort of one of those kind of bubble maps, the overwhelming majority would be on the wrong side of the line.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did a similar thing, although in the same country. I taught for my alma mater, for my university. They called me to lead on some seminars for business planning. So I was working on Saturdays, basically the whole Saturday, and I was attending to about 80 students. And I had to teach them how to write business plans and then get them to write one and go through that and give them a grade. And it was a lot of on-site and off-site things that I did in addition to my regular job at the time. And I never really asked many questions on what I'm going to be compensated for this, because I assumed it's not going to be much, but it's going to be nice to have. So I missed the full semester of Saturdays, and what I got paid was less than a tenth of what I would have been paid if I washed windows.
Yeah.
For that time.
Yeah.
So they paid me. I thought they didn't because they couldn't really see the difference on my bank account.
Yeah.
And they have these exit polls for the students, and I got some really good grades. They asked me if I would return. No, but thanks for that joke. I mean, I now have in my CV, right, that I taught at my alma mater, and that's a wonderful experience. And so I realized that realization was part of my payment. Thank you, university. So I want to challenge a little bit one thing that you said about the basic cost of living. So you said you should price where you're located. I would phrase it a little differently. It has to make sense where you're located.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So as a business owner, you've done your calculations as to this is my minimum income. And then you can prorate that down to an hourly or day rate. And so, yes, I'm not suggesting that I should always charge the rate that my previous employer had me on in Singapore, because that would have been exorbitant. I had done my calculations about what it costs to live in Singapore, and it sure as hell wasn't like below $100 a day, unfortunately.
Absolutely. So because you had the trouble of starting with a high cost of living and charging to somebody whose frame of reference is a low cost of living.
Yeah.
This is how I started. I started from the opposite direction, which is from a lower purchasing power parity to a higher one. Now, there's two logics. And whatever you take, you're a bad person. I'm just saying this up front. Because if you say your costs are lower, you should charge as if you are charging somebody from your own city. Well, that's a very neo-colonialist look at things, because if I moved to Sydney or to London, the price of my work would suddenly jump 5 times? No, it would still be the same value for the same client, right? On the other hand, if I say, yes, I'm going to charge somebody in London a price that makes sense in London, then I'm a money grabbing profit because I'm charging so much more. I think there's something wrong with this frame of reference. So I usually pare it down to a different question, which is, if I charged somebody a price for Zagreb, Croatia for years, and they were happy with my service.
Right.
And then I achieved a lifelong dream and moved to Singapore. And now my price is 6 times higher, right? They would say, dude, I'm glad that you achieved your lifelong dream, but your cost of living have nothing to do with your service.
Yeah.
But they can have it both ways. I agree with this assessment. However, my cost of living is none of their business anyway. Never. Even if they are in a developing country and I'm in Singapore, or the other way around. Your boss needs to know your costs because he's covering them. And
Yeah.
maybe it doesn't make sense for you to sit in Singapore, but your clients are not your bosses. They don't have any right to know or to draw conclusions. Your cost of living is blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Right? It's absolutely of no concern of theirs. This is something. So I wouldn't say you have to charge where the purchasing power parity that makes sense for you, where you live, but that makes sense where you live. So sometimes it's going to be higher,
Exactly.
probably shouldn't be lower. Before we continue, I'd like to suggest 2 things. Firstly, if this is the first time you're tuning in, I'd love for you to subscribe and hear the next story in a week. And second, if you feel you could do with a little more fearless pricing content, look in the show notes for the link to the popular, short, and sometimes funny biweekly newsletter. That's it. Let's get back to the show.
I completely agree. And I wouldn't have ever charged that work at like full because it was work that wasn't deep pocketed. It was developmental funds to improve the living standards of people in very poor countries for the most part. And what was happening, most of the allegations were despicable. They were like a corruption that was then causing shoddy construction of sewage and waterworks that then resulted in thousands of people getting very sick. One of the cases in particular where there was a huge amount of technical disclosure that was quite difficult to wade through was life-threatening. And there were others in war-torn countries where people's personal safety. It was always more on the passion side of things, but mainly private sector clients sort of paying what is hopefully fair market rate for the value of your services. And then that enables you to do either the totally pro bono stuff, like I do a fair amount of mentoring, which no cost. And that's often to people from backgrounds where they're going to have a tougher time than they should getting ahead in this industry. And so it's having that blend. I think my big mistake was that it was a total combination of very low margin and very high volume. So if it had been like not 50, if it had been 5, I think it would have been very manageable.
I've seen it called portfolio pricing. So you don't price everything at the same rate. There's a difference also when we're talking about portfolio pricing or portfolio of prices, if you like. There's a difference between something called growth work and sustaining work.
Yeah.
It's completely fine to go, you say, okay, this is people's drinking water. This is, babies not drinking contaminated water.
Yeah.
I can take a hit on this, whatever.
Yeah.
Right. One of these things could be more tedious for you. And you can just say, the only thing that I'm getting out of this is money.
Yeah.
Then you price it like money is the only thing that you're getting. If you're getting personal satisfaction, if you're getting personal vindication, if you're getting basically a foot in the door for another opportunity that you wouldn't have normally. So that's all the things that you're getting that is not just money. Then you can be creative with your pricing.
Yeah.
Right. For the sustaining work, basically just say, this is the price, take it or leave it, goodbye.
Yeah.
So that's a portfolio. Cool. And yes, you already mentioned the representative of value. The problem with starting with a weak base, you also stated this.
Yeah.
You started with a weak base and then there's simply not, it's very hard to go 30% up from what you said. It's very easy to give it 30% discount.
Yeah, no, exactly. And and also my arguments, I did want to appear kind of insensitive to people I knew on the other end, probably weren't getting paid very well. So that there was one with those allegations where after we factored in the time going back and forwards and speaking to the whistleblower and reviewing all of the disclosures and then our internal qualifications, and then working out what wasn't possible in the investigative plan. Because I was keeping a time log because I'd had that discipline from my previous job, and I thought it would be sensible to take it into this new company. I think it was like 7+ days. I remember starting this email sort of explaining, that the sum divided by 7, etc., the cost of living in Singapore. And I was like, that's not an argument that's going to resonate. So I just went for a more simple one, which is that I think you can agree that this project and some of the others have been considerably more work than was initially envisaged. Therefore, would it be possible to charge a multiple for such projects? My cost of living, my cost, etc. It's nobody's business, and it's also my problem and not theirs. It was instinctively always easier to just look at, well, there is a distinct mismatch in terms of workload across these cases. So can we not deal with that as the variable rather than,
Because they know they've sent you the German Bible.
Yeah, the German engineer who was sending incredibly detailed sort of explain us around different types of the composites and their roles in supporting tunnel structures. It was easy reading for somebody who isn't an engineer, but yeah. Although they give me some of the funniest anecdotes I've ever had, and including when we started going to the lockdown, and my daughter was sat next to me, and she was like, "Why are you scrolling through Facebook?" And I had a hunch that these people who'd stolen a whole bunch of armored SUVs, military grade things in a war-torn country from an international donor, I had a hunch that they might not be the sharpest tools in the shed because of the way that the crime had been committed. And that hunch was vindicated because I found their Facebook profiles, and sure enough, there was pictures of them posing with their kids on hoods of the cars that they'd then stolen from their employer and stuff. I remember ever since then, my daughter thinks that most crimes are solved by scrolling through Facebook. So that was sort of, it's a nice anecdote. And then there was
she's probably right.
Right. Well, she's not far wrong. And there was another one where it was just I looked at the deal structure and I was like, who signed off on this? It was the purchase of luxury vehicles, Italian luxury vehicles, for hosting some state delegation in a country with basically no roads, certainly not roads that could take low-slung Maseratis. And then they'd been shipped by a broker in Sri Lanka and then rerouted somewhere else. I was like, at what stage did somebody go that how did this even get to a position of Maseratis to a hilly country with no viable roads by lots of intermediary brokers, and then wonder why of the 50 cars delivered, 40 something went missing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
However, it does. So in a portfolio, it does have its place. Have its place. There are some things that cannot be solved differently, and still make sense to everybody involved.
I still think a sensible client should put caps and milestones, because I'm seeing when people know that they're just on the clock, it can. I wouldn't say I've not come across fraudulent billing, but certainly people will pursue avenues that they really wouldn't if they had more skin in the game. So I remember one case where it was about reviewing CCTV. Because they were on time and materials, they could sit there and review hours of CCTV, whereas there was a much better way to solve that crime, which was actually, would have required getting your ass on the grass, and it's a bit more work, but it would have done it a lot more quickly. And so I think that the sensible client, even on an investigation, should have certain, maybe within bands, but sort of price ceilings where it's like, we should at least be at some sort of diagnostic nodal stage at this point. So I think
you have to have experience for this.
Yeah.
You have to have experience for this, notably bad experience for this. I mean, we've all received bills from vets and car mechanics that sent our heads flipping, right? But you have to have experience to realize this. But as you said, most of the time, it's not about fraud.
Right.
However, I dislike time and materials because it makes sense in a completely commoditized service where everybody understands what this entails and how much. So if I needed to clean an office, I basically have to ask you just how large the office is.
Yeah.
There's going to be some variation. It's fine. And this is what I can charge time and materials for. Not a problem. However, in this stretch, you're asking me to work against myself.
Yes.
One colleague of mine, Jonathan Stark, he says, I don't see a reason why an IT company charging time and materials would ever upgrade their computers.
Yeah.
The slower things take, the better,
Yes, agreed.
right? I, it's a misalignment of incentives that is fundamental. Every hour that I don't charge my clients, I don't get. And there's personal ethics, and there's codes of ethics, there's rules, there's traditions, there's all sorts of band-aids
Yeah.
to make it still work. However, these are band-aids. It's fundamentally problematic,
Was that
right?
I agree. I used to repeatedly have clients ask in past lives that surely you have something off the shelf. And a condition for most consultancies is you price most projects ground up. And so there's no incentive to actually syndicate or commoditize intellectual property because you've got to keep people utilized. It's a weird model. And so when I started this business, and I do have to contract people for certain projects where they might have a skill set that I don't, or a local language or whatever it is, on those things, there's still a pressure from the clients, ironically, to sort of itemize and to do like hourly this and to do all of that. And as you said, that it provides, now that I'm paying these people, I don't care about their utilization. I care about their output. But then you go into a different pricing territory, which is obviously one to help me out with, which is where you have commoditized and you syndicated that intellectual property to bring down the cost. Also something that would have taken you, let's say, I don't know, crisis management framework that might have taken you first time X hours or XXX hours to do, but you can now sell X divided by 5 or whatever it is. And then there's another conversation, because to your point about some people, most people are very reasonable, but there are some people that want it both ways. So like, do you have something off the shelf? And you go, yeah, and this is the price. And they're like, oh, but you've done it before, so why have it kind of got any value? And an architect doesn't give away, who's built a set of houses that are similar to this set of houses doesn't just sort of give them away for free. A lawyer who's done a will a million times doesn't give them away for free because they've done it a million times. It's a difficult argument to explain was things have a residual value. You're welcome to go and get someone to build it to you ground up. But the reason you come to me is you don't want that, but then you can't expect it to be basically free. Yeah.
Whatever you do a million times is going to be hard, is going to cease to be that hard, right? You're going to know the tools, you're going to build the tools, you're going to have the tools already off the shelf, blah, blah, blah. I understand this very well. And especially when things are complicated. And this is who I talk to. This show is for specialists and experts. And I remember at my first company, we did prototyping for board games and card games and games that serve for shops to get customer loyalty and customer loyalty programs and stuff. And they always wanted to lower the price by saying, yeah, and the rules should be really simple.
Mm.
And they thought that this means that the price goes down because the rules are very simple. But if you've ever written anything in your life, so if you want a game with 20 pages of rules, you can have that in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Not a problem. If you want it in 5 pages, that's like probably 2 months at least. If you want it in 1 page, that's 6 months
Mhm.
work. And focus groups and testing and redesign.
The iPhone principle and Amazon as well. Minimize the button clicks to complete the transaction and also for everything to be intuitive. And that simplicity
Yes.
is easy for us to see with that hindsight. Oh, of course, that makes sense. I'm finding it now with risk assessment is a very good area where taking a progressively more reductionist approach to it. And when you talk to people, they're like, oh, that sounds great, but it's been 22 years of doing it mainly the old way, and then, which is quite long form, and then working out how to change it and adapt it. No, that doesn't work. Therefore we have to tweak this way. And so simplifying.
And I think the good talking point, you said it's hard to explain that things have residual value, right?
Yeah.
I would go with something along the lines of, yes, I do have something on the shelf, and I've done this a million times. So I've done this hundreds of times. Do you think I should be penalized for this? So how dare I have something that will save you time and get your results quicker, I should probably get paid less for that, right? You can play it for laughs.
Right.
And of course, nobody will agree with this sentence. And then you say, so this is why this costs you this. The other way to go about it is to say, I did it hundreds of times. It's not based on how much time it would take me to do it. It's based on how much it would take you to do it. If you want to go on time, this is the value that you're getting. So you don't have to spend that time.
Really?
You can just pay me to get you something that you would get from this equivalent of time. It takes me less because I did it for 22 years.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, you're somebody whose career started in counterintelligence,
Mm.
I find that impressive. It's absolutely possible that they would not even remember some of the things that you remember to use, to include, to this and that. So they're going to do a worse job at much higher time rate.
Mm.
So it doesn't make sense for the price to be on your time, right?
Yeah. So many things that we don't talk about honestly that I would really wish we would, because it's in everyone's interest. I remember in COVID, I made friends with the Australian risk management community. There was another project that came in at the time for a Singaporean entity. And on the other side, there were like 8 decision makers, even at the proposal stage. Everyone was kind of chipping in. And then you can put into your contract only X number of revisions, etc. But honestly, as we know, the larger party often has the power. If they want to keep revising, you face a difficult thing going, no, I'm not going to anymore. So it's challenging. And also the other thing is I've worked with organizations where their procurement and all their systems are so insane that just getting paid is like 120-day payment terms. How do you think that sets up the relationship in terms of the supplier? You know, a small business is basically floating your cash flow as a massive MNC. How do you think that disposes us towards? These are things that should be discussed as well, because what the point I'm getting at is, I don't know if your show is X-rated or not, but the Australians said there is something with premium, and that's what they'd had to learn the hard way. And this can range from 20% to like 200%, because they'd led to dealing with a health authority in Australia where there were so many egos and stakeholders on their posturing on the other side that it was just impossible to get anything approved. And they had to learn that so it's almost like you have this matrix of loads of stakeholders, no clear decision makers, incredibly cumbersome process, very difficult to get paid, takes a huge amount of time to get paid. All of these things in terms of price competitiveness, I think clients would do well to sort of think in clients, the wrong way to frame. Larger organizations should think that actually they're probably wasting a huge amount of time by having people on the other side overprice things because of inefficiency. So on that Singapore project, in the end, it was actually farcical. There were 8 revisions of this training deck. And by the end, they were making revisions to their own revisions. My content was long gone. It had sort of gone out the window, died a death. So they were just editing their own work. And so this is an extraordinary inefficiency. When people were to have pricing discussions. So my advice to those large organizations, you want to get a good deal, be as easy to work with as possible. And then most of us on the other side, we're delighted when we come across that, and we will be very happy and much more pliant. So getting a good deal isn't that difficult. Just be nice to work with and treat us like we're humans.
It's true that the only real leverage that an expert can have. So one of my professors called this the elephants and fleas model, not because we're parasites, but because we're completely different beings. So the only thing that you can do to have any semblance of negotiating position, negotiating power, is taking away your expertise. So you can't really sue them. There's nothing to be gained there. They have many more lawyers than you have friends, you know? So the only thing you can do is, let's say, okay, then I can deliver my expertise in this. And this only works if they realize how painful this can be for them. So one of the things that you have to address in the initial thing is, if we don't do this in a proper way, this can happen. So you can tell it in a story or anything like this. And I know this is complicated because people who are paying you are not necessarily the people who are hiring you in these big corporations and stuff.
Yeah.
But at least help your allies there address this with their superiors, that this is not a commodified thing. We can't just find another guy called Rupert and things are going to be fine. Unless they realize the difference, and purchasing apartments are hard on this sometimes. It's the more clients that you have in a year, the less actual negotiating power they actually have over you.
Yeah.
People think that the person with the more resources, more houses, more boats, more soldiers, more lawyers, more whatever, more computers or servers is the one that holds the negotiating power. That's not true at all.
I think with some people that would be the counter-argument that there are alternatives.
So there are alternatives. However, how confident are they that they can tell a difference between something that is going to work out in their favor and something that is not?
I think, to be very blunt, from what I've seen in risk assessment, particularly when they see the product afterwards, okay, now I see the difference, but that is obviously, it comes with delivery. So articulating that at the early stage, one of the things I and other smaller entities are up against is that, your quote, nobody gets fired hiring IBM. So even if the risk assessment commissioned by one of the big four is underwhelming and overpriced, it's still, for a regulatory point of view, a fig leaf, preserving some modesty. Whereas a better job being done by a smaller entity in a way that actually gives you a proper three-dimensional perspective of risk rather than just a basically glorified internal benchmarking, is hard to conceptualize at the beginning. And also, you have to really be finding the right organization that is committed to actually knowing what's going on and wanting to address it. Because there are a lot of folks who, and it's not that they're bad people or anything like that, it's often they're just totally overwhelmed. And also, you look at the data on employee satisfaction. So it's something I talked about on another podcast recently. The most data always seems to suggest at least 50% of the workforce is disenfranchised. You're dealing with someone that's overworked, demotivated, just dealing with sort of everyone fighting them. Sometimes they're in a position of, they're having these hostile discussions with the business. And then they know that they have to do this sort of thing, whether it's training, risk assessment, whatever, annually. Do they really care about going the extra mile and getting a really fantastic job done, or do they want somebody that just ticks the box as well? So there's so many sort of dynamics at play.
Rupert, thank you very much. I'm just wondering, where can people find you?
LinkedIn would be the easiest place to find me.
So Rupert, thank you once again for joining us today. And to you, dear listener, thank you also for sitting in with us today. And see you next time on What I Should Have Charged. Bye. Thanks for listening. If you would like to hear more, simply subscribe. Until next time, your host, Filip Vojic.